Hi everyone, this is DKeys, bringing you an updated Staff Elementalist build guide following the April 19th, 2016 balance patch. What changed in this patch is that the Staff Fire Auto Attack got a pretty significant buff, that is 17%, so that really changed the balance between when swapping into air would be more beneficial to your DPS as opposed to just staying in fire. And basically now you'll just want to camp fire. As a reminder, Staff is strong on large hitboxes and against large groups of enemies. It's also pretty strong in short fights, those that last about 15 to 25 seconds. And since dungeons and fractal rewards were buffed with this patch as well, you'll be seeing a lot more fights in that length range. Remember that Staff is also glassier compared to fresh air builds and also to a lot of other classes. And swapping out of fire attunement really hurts your DPS. So choose wisely when determining which build to run for an encounter, especially if you're not very comfortable with that encounter. The traits for the Staff build remain the same. Your specialization lines are Fire, Air, and Tempest. In Fire, Empowering Flame increases your power while in Fire attunement, which is a nice buff that you'll have up just about all the time. At the Adept level, Burning Precision will give your critical hits a chance to apply burning, and since you'll have a high crit rate, this will lead to about 50% uptime of burning on your own. This pairs very well with your grandmaster minor trait, Burning Rage, which is a 10% damage modifier to those burning foes. There are a few other things you can do in your rotation to easily get that up to close to 100% burning uptime on your own, though in most cases, and especially in raids, a boss should have burning on them basically 100% of the time. The other two traits at this level, Conjurer and Cleansing Fire, don't do a lot for your DPS. Conjurer can be useful if you happen to be using Lightning Hammer for, say, blinding mobs, and Burning Fire can be nice for pulling conditions off you, but a lot of organized groups will have other sources of condi removal. You can also swap into water and use some skills there to remove those conditions, so this is why Burning Precision is a better choice than those two for this offensive build. Sunspot does a little bit of damage around you when you swap into Fire attunement, and since you will basically be staying in Fire attunement the whole time, you won't be seeing a lot of use from this trait, but it's a little bit of nice damage, especially for short fights. At the Master level, Pyromancer's Training is not only a 10% damage modifier while you're in Fire attunement, but also reduces the recharge on all your fire weapon skills by 33%. This means the cooldown on Lava Font goes from 6 seconds to 4 seconds, so you'll have over a 100% uptime on Lava Font. And Meteor Shower, which also hits very hard, goes from a 30-second cooldown to a 20-second cooldown. This is pretty huge for your DPS. Again, Burning Rage is a damage modifier on burning foes. And then at the Grandmaster level, Persisting Flames not only extends the duration of your fire fields by 2 seconds, so that means your Lava Font goes from a 4-second duration up to a 6-second duration, and your Burning Retreat fire field and a couple of other fire fields that you may have access to sometimes go from, say, 6 seconds to 8 seconds, or if you happen to be using another weapon to stack might, your fire fields will go from 8 to 10, 9 to 11, and so on. This trait also allows your blast finishers to apply Fury when they're performed in any fire field. So if you happen to hit a fire field from a Guardian, or an NG, or another Elementalist, you will provide Fury. Also, you will produce a Lava Font that lasts an excessively long time when you get downed, which really helps with rallies and clutch situations, especially in dungeons and fractals. Another option that some people like, though I highly do not recommend, is Pyromancer's Puissance, which will cause your fire skills to give you might, but the DPS increase, even with low levels of might from Persisting Flames on your Lava Font, out DPSs this trait alone. If you are short on might, use a Strength Sigil or Golden Dumplings as your food instead for better DPS. And finally, Blinding Ashes with its ICD has some niche uses, particularly when trying to blind mobs, especially when there aren't a lot of other sources of blind. You could also use Glyph of Storms in Earth Attunement, or you can use other weapons as an Elementalist that can provide those blinds as well. In air, Zephyr's speed lets you move faster when you're attuned to air, so when running around the open world, fractals, dungeons, or raids, you can swap into air attunement and have an easy, fast movement speed without using any of your skills or swapping to Signet of Air on your utility skill bar. Ferocious Winds converts a portion of your precision to ferocity without you losing any of that precision, so it's a nice little bonus that adds about 3 to 5% DPS to your build. If I'm in a party and really short on Fury, I will often run Zephyr's Boon instead, and take Feel the Burn and another Shout as my utilities. That does hurt the DPS, especially on a staff Elementalist, but not as much as having 0 Fury. Electric Discharge is more damage on your target when you swap into air, so you won't really be seeing a lot of use of this trait with this particular build. My go-to trait at the master level for air is Inscription, which reduces the recharge on your glyphs. One very popular glyph that goes great with the staff build is Glyph of Storms. In Fire Attunement, this applies some burning to your target, though in Air Attunement, this stacks a lot of vulnerability and is great on large hitboxes. Also for an elite, Glyph of Elementals is very popular, especially in raids, for its added utility. So that trait, Inscription, will reduce the cooldown of those skills so that they're up more often. Though in low-level dungeons and fractals, where you basically break the boss's break bar and then burst them down really quickly, Tempest Defense is great for that additional damage modifier. At the Grandmaster level, your minor trait, Weak Spot, will give your critical hits a chance to apply vulnerability. So that applies to any attunement, not just air attunement. But if you happen to open combat with Glyph of Storms in air attunement, or overload air, between that and this trait, you'll basically be capping vulnerability on your own, just for the very start. Past that, you'll be contributing a decent number of vulnerability stacks, especially since Unshakable doesn't really apply to most combat now. Finally, Bolt to the Heart is a 20% damage modifier to foes under 50% health. So this is a huge boost to your DPS, especially as a fight wears on and your burst skills aren't coming off cooldown, so that you can get through that tougher end part of a fight more quickly, especially in raids where typically bosses have more mechanics for you to deal with at the end of the fight as opposed to the beginning. In the Tempest trait line, I usually use Unstable Conduit for the extra auras when overloading an attunement, though a very popular option which saves lives left and right and is great for dungeons, fractals, and raids if you don't really need that extra sustain or support from those extra auras, is Galsong. This will be a stun break whenever you happen to need one, basically. Speedy Conduit gives you swiftness when overloading an attunement, so one easy rotation when running around is Camp Air for that 25% movement speed, use your movement skills in air for some swiftness, and then once you use those, swap to water and overload water for more swiftness and then head back to air. Harmonious Conduit is a 10% damage modifier for 5 seconds after you complete an overload. So this is a nice little damage boost. Not as important in this build just because you're typically overloading just fire, but every little bit helps. Also, it gives your attunements the ability to give you stability, which means you don't really need to slot any stability on your bar with this trait. Sometimes, another popular option, typically for more Auramancer builds, which usually pair better with fresh air, though it definitely has its uses in staff builds as well, especially for healers, though I won't really get into that, is Invigorating Torrents, or as you apply, also grant regeneration and vigor. About the best use for this trait in a DPS build is if you're in a difficult fight and that vigor would really help you out. Slot auras on overload, maybe an extra shout on your bar for that aura. This will give you a decent amount of vigor uptime so that you have more dodges, since with a fire camping staff build, you won't really see a lot of use from a Sigil of Energy or other ways to give yourself more dodges. Hardy Conduit gives you prot when you overload an attunement, which is a nice little boost to your survivability since you have very little of it on your own to begin with. And then finally, Elemental Bastion will give you a little bit of healing when you put an aura on yourself, and also that healing will apply to allies if you put that aura on them. Also, you will give yourself a Frost aura if you go under a 75% health threshold, so that helps a little bit more with your survivability. For gear, I recommend full Berserker's armor and trinkets now. On your armor, you want to use Superior Runes of the Scholar for best DPS, just because that damage modifier is great, as well as that extra power and ferocity. And even though you may not see great uptime on that damage modifier, it's so strong it typically outclasses other runes you could use, even when you have uptime of that buff as low as 50%. If you're looking for DPS boosting infusions, I would recommend Mighty Infusions for that extra power, since in raids you'll often be butting up against that crit chance cap. For your weapon, I would recommend a Berserker's weapon with sigils of force and accuracy for raids and daytime instances if you don't want to invest in force and slaying sigils for daytime. For Knight, I would instead recommend an Assassin's staff with Knight and Force sigils or Knight and Slaying for the top DPS. This is because without that accuracy sigil, there's no chance you'll be getting close to that crit chance cap, and then the Assassin staff pairs a little bit better with that Ferocious Winds trait. If you're newer to Ellie and still working on gearing it up, or not quite comfortable with its low armor and health pool, you can do a few other easy substitutions in your gear. Instead of running Berserkers and Assassins, Marauders isn't a bad choice for Ellie, though it's not necessarily meta, and I would consider running full Marauders a sign that you're not really comfortable with the Ellie playstyle at all. So, if you happen to use a Marauder's weapon, you're only losing 1.5 to 2% of your DPS for another 10% HP, basically. Or if you run Marauder's armor, but Berserkers or Assassins staff and trinkets, that's about a 2% DPS loss for 2000 HP. If you are running a significant amount of Marauders, I wouldn't recommend the accuracy sigil. I would go back to using an air sigil here, and I would recommend the Berserker staff for Knight as opposed to Assassins. So Marauders, you want less other sources of precision or crit chance. If you run Marauders trinkets, you'll be losing about 3 to 5% of your DPS overall for about 3000 HP. It's a huge buff to your survivability, but at that point you will be running into crit chance problems if you're in a group, say with a ranger, and if you have, say, a Sigil of Accuracy on. If you aren't comfortable with Scholars and even just maintaining it 50% of the time, Flame Legion runes are a reasonable alternative. Or if you don't feel like using Flame Legion runes because you're not comfortable in Scholars uptime or your burning uptime, Ogre and Rage are alternative sets there. For your sigils, I noticed Force sigils were pretty expensive the other day, so for nighttime you could use an Accuracy and Night sigils instead, and you can use Air and Accuracy for day, though I would highly recommend saving up for that Force sigil. For food for the staff build, I would actually recommend the damage modifier while moving foods such as seaweed salad, experimental remnants, sage and asparagus salad, and the corresponding consumable that you can now get from World v World. Even though you'll be rooted during your Meteor Shower and Frostbow 4, you'll be seeing a very good uptime on that buff otherwise, so that really contributes to your DPS. Otherwise, I would recommend either truffle steak or sweet and spicy butternut squash soup, or something else that boosts your power mainly, and ferocity second, or precision second. For difficult content, it's sometimes nice to have a little bit of lifesteal food as well. And for casual content, Birthday Blaster just can't be beat since it buffs precision, ferocity, and power. For a utility consumable, Toxic Sharpening Stones are your best for your raid DPS or for untyped enemies, followed by Tins of Fruitcake or other 10% Sharpening Stones, and 8% Sharpening Stones. You can also get equivalents of these in World v World. Whenever possible though, use a potion of a corresponding enemy type, since that boosts your damage as well as your survivability. And from fractals, since you're going to get them from drops anyway, use mist defensive and offensive potions when you need that extra bit of survivability or offense. The typical raid loadout that I use when playing a staff elementalist is Wash the Pain Away for my heal, Signet of Fire, Conjure Frostbow, and Glyph of Storms as my utility slot skills, and Rebound as my elite. Frostbow and Glyph of Storms will give you the highest sustained DPS rotation. Sometimes for easy fights, I'll swap Wash the Pain Away out for Arcane Brilliance just for that extra blast finisher should I feel like I need to contribute to Might or Fury. And if you're not comfortable using Conjure Frostbow in your rotation, or if you happen to be running with Pugs, you can use Arcane Wave for that extra blast finisher and comparable DPS, though a little bit lower. Arcane Blast for very good DPS, a little bit better than Arcane Wave just because it has a lower cooldown. Or Feel the Burn for that extra burning and that extra fire aura. Also, for some bosses, such as Veil Guardian or Matthias, I would take Lightning Flash instead of that Frostbow. Lightning Flash gives you the mobility to get to green circles on VG, or get yourself to the edge of the arena at Matthias, or allows you to cast Meteor Shower at Sabbatha without interrupting it if she happens to Flame Wall, though proper planning of your rotation can also get around that. If you're looking for more survivability because you're not comfortable on Staff Elementalist, you can also swap out that same Frostbow for Arcane Shield, which will help you block an attack or two if you're trying to do a difficult part of your rotation, Mist Form to help get yourself out of sticky situations, or again, Lightning Flash for that mobility if used well. For easier fights, I will also sometimes take Glyph of Elementals instead of Rebound during raids so that I can contribute more to DPS with either the Fire Elemental or Air Elemental, or to CC with Water Elemental or Air Elemental. For dungeons and low-level fractals, instead of taking Wash the Pain Away, I'll take Arcane Brilliance almost all the time just to have that blast finisher to use out of combat. Fire Signet is always powerful. Glyph of Storms is a great opener and also applies a lot of burning so that I can maintain good uptime on my traits. And Fiery Greatsword for the mobility, as well as the strong opener from FGS 5, as well as overloading while having that FGS in my hand. Conjure Frostbow is a great choice if your fight's going to be over 20 seconds, though if it's going to be a really quick fight, taking an instant like Arcane Wave, Arcane Blast, or Feel the Burn will do more for your DPS. Feel the Burn has the added benefit of being able to maintain that burning damage modifier when you're not in Fire Attunement, or just as things are starting to get going and that burning is stacking up. Other situational skills, which I'll typically swap Frostbow out for as well, just because that's a little bit less DPS overall to your rotation than Glyph of Storms, are Aftershock for that magnetic aura for your group, Lightning Flash for that mobility, or again, if you're having trouble surviving, Arcane Shield or Mist Form. With the added utility from your overloads and other attunements, I usually don't find any need to slot more stability for myself or more Conti removal. Also, with a staff build, usually Lightning Hammer isn't very useful, so it's great if you need additional blinds for multiple enemies. And Conjure Earth Shield has a pretty nice mid-range pull if no one else in your group can pull enemies, especially in dungeons. Your DPS rotation will primarily be in Fire Attunement. Your skill priority is Lava Font for that steady DPS, which is a very, very strong damage per second effort. After that, your priority is Overload Fire and Meteor Shower, which are both very strong as well, considering how long it takes to cast them. And then finally, you'll want to fill in with your Glyph of Storms, your Frostbow, and then an auto attack, as well as your Flame Burst. Note that if you don't have quickness or alacrity, there will be about 3 fireballs that'll fit nicely between every lava font. If you do have some quickness or alacrity, then you'll want to work in Flame Burst so that you take less time between each of those lava fonts. So with quickness but without alacrity, you do either 5 fireballs or 4 fireballs and 1 Flame Burst. And with both quickness and alacrity, you would also do 3 fireballs, just like a normal rotation, or 2 fireballs and 1 Flame Burst. So that really speeds up your ability to get those lava fonts down for more damage. Burning Retreat isn't really a DPS increase, but you can use that instead of a dodge. So if you're in a dodge heavy situation, make sure to work this in so that you're not depleting your endurance too quickly. Staff Elementalist has a pretty simple DPS priority. Lava Font is the highest, followed by Overload Fire, then Meteor Shower, and then Glyph of Storms with Fireball and Flame Burst filler, and then Frostbow if you're using that, and then finally autoing and using Flame Burst as needed. There are 2 different openings that are useful in combat. The first is when you're running into an active boss. Since you can start a pretty far ways away, open up with Glyph of Storms in air, and if you're using FGS to run around, cast FGS 5 on the boss before overloading air with the FGS still in hand. Then swap to fire, use a Lava Font, and then Meteor Shower. You might have time to sneak in a Flame Burst, Lava Font, and then Overload Fire, and then if it's a short fight, go ahead and use Frostbow right away. If not, you may want to wait if there is a CC bar that you'll need to break. If you have to wait for a boss to become active, or if you want to hit a boss as late as possible to keep your enrage timer as long as possible, you want to start your overload air a little bit early and run into combat when your overload air is about to finish up. Then follow up with FGS 5 while swapping to Fire Attunement if that's applicable, and then put down your Lava Font, Meteor Shower, maybe a Flame Burst, Lava Font, Overload Fire, another Lava Font, and work in your Glyph of Storms as you have a good 1.5-ish second time frame since it has a pretty long cast time. Now that dungeons and fractals are part of everyone's daily farm, it's important to brush up on your might stacking routines. This will enable you to start every fight with close to full buffs. If you're not feeling ambitious, just start in Earth with your staff, use Eruption, then Fire and Lava Font with any other utility blast that you have. If there are multiple Ellies in your party, you can easily cap your Fury stacks by everyone using a fire field such as Warhorn 5, blasting it with Dragon's Tooth and Phoenix, then copying that out with Heat Sink, and then swapping to Earth for a quick blast there with Warhorn 4, and then possibly following that up with Focus 4 as well. Then swap to Air and equip your combat weapons and conjure your FGS if you haven't already. If you are the only Ellie and you're feeling really ambitious, go ahead and start with that same fire combo, then swap to water and put on a dagger by clicking on it from your inventory and using Frozen Burst. Possibly doing the same with a focus for Comet, then swap to Earth for at least Focus 4, if not Warhorn 4 and Dagger 4 as well, to completely cap out your might. This patch put instanced PvE content in a great place, and I'm really excited for the Staff Elementalist buffs as well. Thanks for watching!